In one explosive night, Ukraine turned the tide of war, igniting Russia's $15 billion oil empire and setting its secret shadow fleet ablaze. This wasn't just a strike, it was a message to the world that precision, courage, and intelligence can burn brighter than any empire built on power. His strike on Russia's $15 billion oil lifeline was not merely a physical explosion, it was a seismic tremor that rippled through the very foundation of Russia's economic and military infrastructure. Ukraine's calculated attack was the product of deep intelligence, strategic foresight, and a powerful message that no fortress of wealth or empire of oil is beyond the reach of precision and determination. The operation's impact went far beyond the destruction of infrastructure. It tore through the illusion of invincibility that Russia had built around its energy network. For years, Moscow's oil industry served as the bloodstream of its wartime economy, funding the missiles, tanks, and propaganda that fueled its aggression. But when Ukraine struck this artery, it did more than just halt the flow of oil. It forced the world to see that economic warfare could be just as devastating as the battlefield itself. This was not a random attack. It was a masterstroke in modern hybrid warfare. Ukraine identified the one weakness in Russia's grand strategy, the over-reliance on oil exports to sustain its war budget. By targeting refineries, tankers, and critical infrastructure, Ukraine hit where it would cause the greatest disruption and the deepest panic. The strike sent fireballs into the night sky, but beneath that fire was a storm of economic consequences. Markets trembled, energy analysts scrambled, and Russian officials were forced into silence. Billions of dollars worth of trade routes and contracts vanished in smoke. It was a brutal reminder that the real war today is not just fought with bullets and drones, but with disruption, information, and timing. Ukraine's military had evolved from defending its soil to waging a war of strategic attrition, one where every explosion has a purpose, and every target sends a message. The significance of this operation lies not only in its destruction, but in what it represents: the courage to strike at a system built on deception and greed. Russia's energy network was its greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. By setting its oil assets ablaze, Ukraine demonstrated that even a global superpower can be brought to its knees when its economy is cornered. This was not the work of brute force. It was the work of intelligence, precision. It showed that Ukraine's military evolution is no longer about survival, but about leverage, turning every strike into a statement that says, "We can reach you anywhere." The destruction of a $15 billion asset wasn't just an operational victory, it was psychological warfare that shattered the illusion of Russian dominance and inspired nations watching from afar. The fire that engulfed the oil facilities symbolized more than loss. It marked a shift in global perception. For years, Russia used its oil wealth as a weapon, blackmailing nations with energy dependence and financing aggression with petrodollars. But now, that same wealth had become a liability. The destruction proved that the very source of Moscow's power could be turned against it. Ukraine's message was crystal clear. Power built on corruption and exploitation will eventually collapse under its own weight. In those flames, the world saw a new kind of resistance, one that doesn't rely solely on military might, but on strategic brilliance. Ukraine turned vulnerability into vengeance and fear into firepower. The economic aftershock was immediate. Global oil routes were disrupted. Insurance companies refused to cover risky Russian cargo, and traders began questioning the safety of dealing with Moscow's energy corporations. Every dollar lost in that inferno translated to a setback in Russia's war chest. The strike also emboldened Ukraine's allies, proving that targeted warfare could achieve results that diplomacy alone could not. It was a call to action for nations supporting freedom, reminding them that when courage meets precision, even the largest empires can bleed. This was more than a single victory. It was a blueprint for future warfare. A nation that was once underestimated had now mastered the art of turning the enemy's wealth into their weakness. In that moment, Ukraine didn't just blow up an oil facility, it blew up a symbol of Russian control, arrogance, and economic supremacy. The flames rising from those oil tanks illuminated the truth. The war is not only about land, it's about breaking the chains of dependence and proving that resilience can outsmart riches. What Ukraine achieved that day wasn't just an explosion, it was a statement that echoed across borders. No matter how strong the empire, no shadow can hide from the fire of justice. The Shadow Fleet was once Russia's invisible lifeline, a secret network of tankers that sailed under false flags, concealed their routes, and carried sanctioned oil across the world. It was a ghostly system that operated in silence, keeping Russia's wartime economy alive despite global sanctions. But that silence was shattered when Ukraine turned its intelligence and precision warfare toward the open seas. What followed was not just a military strike, it was an unveiling of deception. In a single calculated operation, Ukraine ignited the Shadow Fleet, transforming the world's perception of maritime warfare and exposing the dark underbelly of Russia's energy survival game. Those vessels, once symbols of secret wealth, became floating infernos that symbolized the collapse of an empire's hidden economy. For years, the Shadow Fleet operated in the gray zone of international law. Hundreds of aging oil tankers, many owned through shell companies and registered in obscure nations, carried millions of barrels of Russian crude every week. These ships traveled without transponders, changed names mid-voyage, and falsified cargo documents to dodge sanctions. They were the invisible arteries of Russia's oil trade vessels that allowed Moscow to fund its invasion and sidestep the pressure of Western restrictions. Each tanker that reached its destination carried not just oil but the weight of corruption, evasion and defiance of global order. The world knew these ships existed, but could never stop them, until Ukraine decided to bring the fight to the sea. The Ukrainian strike on the Shadow Fleet was far more than an act of destruction. It was an act of revelation. By using drones, satellite tracking, and precise maritime intelligence, Ukraine demonstrated a new form of warfare, where technology dismantles secrecy. The attack didn't just destroy ships. It destroyed confidence in Russia's ability to sustain its secret oil operations. Within hours, news spread across global markets, tankers ablaze, routes abandoned, insurance companies withdrawing coverage. It was a domino effect that Russia could not contain. The flames consuming those ships illuminated the world's oceans, signaling that the age of hidden trade was over. What makes this moment historic is how it redefined the nature of war itself. Battles are no longer confined to trenches, skies, or cities. They have expanded to the sea lanes that connect economies. Ukraine's operation exposed the truth that logistics are the heartbeat of war. Cut off the supply, and you choke the machine. By targeting Russia's maritime network, Ukraine struck a blow deeper than any battlefield assault could deliver. It crippled an entire ecosystem of smuggling, one that had funded weapons-fueled tanks and filled propaganda coffers. The destruction of the Shadow Fleet sent a message that modern warfare is no longer about occupying territory but about collapsing systems of power. The operation also showcased Ukraine's mastery of hybrid warfare. It wasn't a confrontation of fleets or a clash of navies. It was a silent hunt guided by intelligence, satellites, and unmanned precision. The sophistication of Ukraine's methods revealed how innovation can outmatch size and strength. In that moment, Ukraine became the hunter and Russia the hunted. The Shadow Fleet, once moving unseen through the darkness of international waters, became a parade of targets exposed under the eyes of a determined and adaptive enemy. The burning tankers served as proof that no act of evasion, no disguise, and no sea route can protect those who thrive on deceit. The economic and psychological shockwaves were immense. Traders and insurers began distancing themselves from Russian oil, shipping companies reconsidered their routes, and nations previously silent about Russia's illicit trade began tightening maritime oversight. In a single strike, Ukraine didn't just cripple a supply chain, it reshaped the global energy map. The message was clear. If Russia relies on shadows, then Ukraine will bring light. Every explosion on the sea was a declaration that the age of impunity was ending. This was not merely a strike, it was a statement. Ukraine had shown the world that no matter how covert the operation, or how vast the sea, justice and intelligence will find their way through. The Shadow Fleet's demise was not only a military triumph, but a moral one. It stripped away the veil of hypocrisy surrounding Russia's economy, and proved that courage and innovation can burn brighter than any empire built on lies. The ocean that once carried Russia's wealth now carries its ashes, a symbol of what happens when darkness meets defiance. Ukraine's message to the world was simple yet powerful. In this new era of warfare, there are no hidden empires, no safe havens, and no shadows deep enough to escape the light of truth. The destruction of Russia's $15 billion oil network was not just a strike against infrastructure. It was a direct assault on the financial engine that fueled its aggression. For decades, Russia's power has relied on its vast reserves of oil and gas, turning natural resources into tools of influence, coercion, and war. Ukraine's attack was designed to cut that lifeline, to choke the very arteries that pumped money into the machinery of invasion. It was an act of economic warfare, strategic, intelligent, and devastating in its precision. Each explosion did more than destroy steel and oil. It dismantled the illusion of economic invincibility that Moscow had projected to the world. This was not about revenge. It was about rebalancing power through the language of economic disruption. Modern wars are no longer fought solely by armies on the front lines. They are fought through the collapse of economies, the disruption of trade, and the exhaustion of financial will. Ukraine understood this better than anyone. By striking the oil infrastructure, it didn't just weaken Russia's capacity to wage war, it crippled its ability to sustain one. Every barrel of oil that went up in flames represented lost funding for missiles, ammunition, and propaganda. Every halted shipment meant another day of economic bleeding. The strike transformed Ukraine's military into something far more powerful, a force that understands the enemy's economic pulse and knows exactly where to apply pressure. It was the art of war translated into financial terms, where the battlefield extends into boardrooms, trade networks, and international energy markets. This operation also symbolized a psychological turning point. For the first time, Russia's economy, once perceived as resilient under sanctions, was visibly vulnerable. The destruction of the oil lifeline was not just about physical damage. It was about breaking confidence. Investors pulled back, foreign buyers hesitated, and even within Russia, whispers of financial instability began to surface. Panic began to replace pride. It was a clear signal to the world that Ukraine was capable of weaponizing intelligence and precision strikes to create economic chaos in the heart of its adversary's empire. What made this strike powerful was not just what it destroyed, but what it exposed, that Russia's so-called economic armor was paper-thin when faced with modern adaptive warfare. Ukraine's strategy here carried a message for the entire world, that sanctions alone were not enough, but when combined with action they could become lethal. The flames that engulfed the oil terminals were also the flames of enforcement, an act of defiance against Russia's continued circumvention of global laws. It was Ukraine taking control of the narrative, turning passive resistance into active disruption. This kind of warfare sends a ripple effect across nations, redefining how smaller powers can stand against economic giants. Ukraine proved that the future of conflict lies in dismantling not just armies but economies, the invisible structures that sustain aggression and fund violence. What made this act even more symbolic was its moral dimension. Every explosion that tore through the oil reserves represented justice for every missile that had struck Ukrainian homes, every blackout caused by Russian attacks, and every family displaced by the war. The destruction of that lifeline was a mirror, a reflection of cause and consequence. Ukraine wasn't just fighting for territory, it was fighting to restore balance, to make the aggressor feel the cost of its own violence. By striking the economic heart of the Russian war machine, Ukraine reminded the world that defense can take many forms, and sometimes the most powerful weapon is precision-guided, not by rage, but by reason. The aftermath of the strike will echo far beyond the battlefield. It will force Russia to rethink its financial dependencies, compel the world to tighten control over illegal trade networks, and inspire smaller nations to see that courage combined with strategy can shake even the largest empires. Ukraine turned economic warfare into a statement of sovereignty. The burning oil fields weren't just symbols of destruction, they were symbols of resistance, of a nation that refuses to be economically strangled while its enemy profits from plunder. In the end, this was more than an operation. It was a declaration of a new era in warfare. Ukraine proved that in the age of drones, data, and digital tracking, wars are won not only by armies, but by those who can strike at the very veins of power. Russia's shadow fleet may burn, its economy may stumble, and its influence may fade, but the message will endure. No empire built on exploitation can withstand the precision of justice. Ukraine's strike was not just an attack on oil, it was a message to the world that tyranny can be drained, one drop of oil at a time.